There is a connection between the paranormal, UFOs, and the myths of ancient history. The clues are scattered across the landscape from a forbidden past, maybe even in your own backyard. There is a connection between the true nature of our reality, consciousness, and the unexplained. I'm Carl the Crusher. Let's explore the unknown. Now, here is the other fascinating connection. Jacques Vallée. We're going to jump a little bit to Jacques Vallée. I've got photos of Jacques Vallée riding around visiting Skinwalker Ranch. We've got photos of him involved in Robert Bigelow's metamaterial research in Nevada at Mount Wilson. And we know that he was involved in the filming of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind with Steven Spielberg, the UFO contact and abduction movie. And he worked as part of the connection with Project Blue Book with J. Allen Hynek, which I'm a friend of his son now. Paul Hynek is a good guy. But there's deep connections here where all these guys are connected. But did you know that Jacques Vallée was actually there too? At Stanford Research Institute, when Edgar Mitchell was there and they were doing those remote viewing experiments in the early days, and they decided to combine it with Bob Monroe's Gateway program, Jacques Vallée was the one behind that. This is a great podcast, by the way. Ryan, he puts on a great show, interviews awesome guests. So Somewhere in the Skies, I think I forgot to put a link to it, but I'll definitely go put one after I get done with this. But check this full interview out. It's crazy. Jacques Vallée talks about, for the first time ever, I think, his actual experiences encountering non-human intelligence. But I did not know that he was there, that he was critical and involved in the early days of the psychic spy program and remote viewing. And I also didn't know, I knew a little bit, but Jacques Vallée was also one of the innovators and inventors clear back in the 1960s of artificial intelligence. So what he's going to be saying here in this interview, it's a little bit hard to follow when you go watch the whole thing. It's a deep dive. But he actually says, Jacques Vallée says that while he was trying to understand computer systems and storage, he was trying to teach this computer algorithm how to access data. And it would go to retrieve files in these different folders, just like a person would try to retrieve a memory. So it would go into the memory of the computer, into these different data packets to retrieve the files. But then he wrote this program that he basically convinced that algorithm to go beyond the structured boxes that it was given and to make a guess, an algorithmic guess or a prediction based on what wasn't even there. And suddenly it started responding with guesses and answers, and it became the first interactions of the early days of artificial intelligence. And at that exact same time as he was figuring that out, he was like best friends with one of the top remote viewers in the world called Ingo Swann. And they were also simultaneously trying to figure out how the human consciousness could leave the human mind to access the greater array of higher dimensions of reality, the same way that artificial intelligence could probe beyond its boundaries of its algorithm to become more self-aware or to think for itself to solve problems. So let's listen to him talk about this and how that all started.
The program is going to get the number and go there and get the information and bring the information to me. And then there is another problem where the range of things is bigger than the memory of the computer. And then it's a form of addressing which has to guess, to go through a random process to go and discover where the information is. And that's called indirect addressing. And Ingo fell in love with that series because to him, this is what consciousness does. You know, it can go to it can go to those different levels, and there is a level where you're just plunging into a range of things that are not in front of you, but are somewhere else. And you still have a way of proceeding within, within that range and find that device. So we started. That's the way the remote viewing program got started, from that conversation between Ingo and me. I don't think the agency knew that, but that was at the time was not written down anywhere. That conversation. Ingo wanted to refine, and I'm getting to your question. Forgive me for being very verbose.
This is great.
Ingo wanted to refine that, and he had a special program by himself where he was going to define the process by which he could train people in remote viewing. And he wanted to use me as a subject. Now, I'm a mediocre remote viewer, but I understand the process. And we did a number of experiments. I did a number of experiments with both Uri Geller and Ingo and others. And I had done some experiments in France that convinced me that I could understand the process. I could not use it reliably if you're looking for the solution to a crime, for example. I wouldn't be the best person to do that.
So first of all, again, I had no clue. I had no idea that Jacques Vallée was actually there even before Edgar Mitchell and was friends with Ingo Swann, and that they were talking about the development clear back in the 1960s of not only artificial intelligence, but how to transcend the human mind through telepathy. And it was literally Jacques Vallée was the one there that was the key between them and the CIA and the DIA, where these weird mystical conversations were happening. And then all of a sudden the funding came pouring in and these projects became something a lot bigger. But I had no idea that at the very beginning, when they were discussing this and before they even formed the Stanford Research Institute remote viewing program, that all of that started with a conversation between Jacques Vallée and Ingo Swann.
Ingo thought that I did it well enough that he could use me as a subject in developing the different stages of his method. The first method was just getting an overall impression. The first level of the method was beginning to get specific impressions of, for example, names of things and colors, music, sound, wind, things like that. And then you would go deeper and deeper into details, always recalling the information and reprocessing it. So that's the way it works. So we had a long table in a room that was classified. Most of SRI didn't know how that room was used. It was only used for that project. And he had coordinates, which were based on that initial discussion we had. We used coordinates as the way to name, to have a handle for the site. And it was a little bit like scattered castles might be, the coordinates. But at that time, he was still using longitude and latitude. And we would get up. I had another job at that point. I was doing venture capital. I was doing investing. But I would go twice a week, in that lab with him, and we would work on it the whole morning. And over the whole morning, we would do 4 or 5 different sites of different difficulty. One time I go there at 8 o'clock in the morning. He's sitting at one end of the table. I'm sitting at the other end. All I have is a pencil and some paper. And he had some pencil, a pencil, a number 2 pencil, always, and some paper. It was very, very rigid, very structured. And he takes a file, opens it up, and reads longitude and latitude. And I become sick, essentially. And he says, Jacques, what happens? And I say, well, Ingo, this is, I don't know where you're sending me, but it's very uncomfortable. And he says, well, tell me what you feel. And I feel, well, I have vertigo. I'm very cold. I'm scared. I'm scared that I'm going to fall. And there is wind around me, and it's very cold, and I'm very uncomfortable. And he says, you're on top of a mountain in the Andes.
Whoa.
He says, we're done for this morning. We're going to stop there. Because you got it. Yeah, you went to the site.
Yeah.
And I wasn't supposed to go to the site. I was supposed to draw something that might have been, a little peak. And then at the next level, he would have said, how do you feel? And I would have said, well, it's kind of cold, and we would have done, this was level 1, level 2, level 3. I was at level 7, essentially. I was there.
Wow.
And I said, well, Ingo, I'm on the roll here. I got it. Why don't we continue with other sites? He said, no, you're going home, because I want you to remember that. I want you to go home with that feeling, because you got 100% of it. You were at the site.
Wow.
And
so just to add the other level onto this, imagine they're thinking, if you can sit in the office in the top secret office that they've got at Stanford Research Institute and just run these like miniature Montauk experiments there, and you can out of body travel to another place and actually guess it right just based off of random numbers on an envelope, then what does that mean about espionage? What does that mean about the Cold War and spying on our enemies? What does that mean about reality and who we are? And not only that, what does that tell us about what else is out there? Because as soon as you start to become an explorer of these dimensions, an explorer of consciousness, and you start going through that, like, what if you don't just remote view Mount Everest, but you remote view Mars, or you remote view the Roswell crash, or you remote view another planet where there could be life or something like that. And suddenly you come back with information that you're not supposed to know. And then you can go there and verify it.
I've never, it's one thing I've never forgotten. And I know the process. I know how the process works. I know what you have to do to make it work. Now, my problem is that, at heart, I'm a computer programmer. I'm a hacker. So I'm very rational and very structured in what I do. I like things to be neat. I like things to have a structure and so on. And this is, I understand why Ingo was so good, because Ingo was an artist, and he was working. He was getting at the same result, but he was getting at the result in a much richer way that was less structured. Okay, and he wanted to combine the two. He wanted to bring structure to it, to teach it to people. Okay, and I've never forgotten that experience. There was another experience which is more recent, that I have not completely recovered from,
So this also becomes a very critical step. The individual Ingo Swann, we're going to get to him next. Ingo Swann was the key individual that took it from being seen like some kind of a mysticism, like from taking mushrooms and just meditating in a cave. And he actually tried to transform the methodology of remote viewing and out of body travel or astral projection into an actual format or a science or a way that could be repeated over and over and over again so that it could be actually proven that it was real, that they could actually validate it. And that's how they came up with this whole double blind method of putting the targets into envelopes and hiding them behind numbers and actually making it more difficult. They went away from using longitude and latitude numbers to try and find the target, to actually just using randomized computer generated numbers and things like that to make it harder and harder. But all of that, they kept pushing the limits of this and making these crazy breakthroughs as they went. He goes on to talk about how he got into this sort of altered state of consciousness doing this meditation. And this was just recently. And he actually had a visitation from an entity, and he describes it like a being of light that was like tall with a kind of a larger head that came to him. And he really describes this like this spiritual encounter and experience. And he tells that full story like it's a full interaction directly with non-human intelligence. This is after his entire life of researching this phenomena and digging into it. And then here he is telling the story about how the remote viewing program started at Stanford with Ingo Swann. And then right after that, literally in the same paragraph, talks about how even now that has changed his life and he feels like he's had visitation. But the key principle is that when we talked about how Ingo Swann worked with Jacques Vallée, they were computer programmers trying to figure out how to program artificial intelligence to get it to wake up. And at the same time, they were applying those same methods to how can we get actually strategic data and provable data from this remote viewing process. And that's how it started to go like it was on steroids, like the whole thing went to another level. Who is Ingo Swann, and what happened with Ingo Swann that opened the floodgates to this whole psychic spy program?
Early on in the CIA remote viewing program that I set up at SRI, I was asked to check out claims of a psychic, Ingo Swann. Ingo had done experiments at City College in New York under Professor Gertrude Schmeidler. She had set up thermistors, and from across the room, he could make the temperatures go up and down. And so
there's Hal Puthoff. Again, he was the one that was there with Uri Geller and Edgar Mitchell with the metamaterial, right? Clear back there with Werner von Braun at NASA on that day. He was the one that was there. So here he is now with Ingo Swann talking about Ingo.
I took this claimed psychic, invite him out to SRI to see what he could do. He had the quark detector, and so it was basically a quantum chip inside a mu metal magnetic shielding, inside of steel dewar for electrical shielding, inside of superconducting shielding, the requirement being that nothing could affect this thing from the outside. So I want to see if you can affect it. He affected it unequivocally 100%. You had this slow oscillation. What he did was he stopped the oscillation. Now, what turned out to be even more, quote, magical was when we asked him, how do you know what to do? And he said, well, all I did was look inside. And then he drew out how things were related inside that had never been published. And it turned out that they were accurate. And so it was when I wrote all that up and circulated around, that's when the CIA came knocking at my doorstep. And he said, oh, we've been looking for you. And I said, why? What did I do? He said, well, the Russians have been spending millions of dollars at their best institutes with their best people for years. No scientist in America even believes there's such a thing as psychokinesis or ESP or whatever. And you happen to do this experiment. And so, we graduated from there to having remote viewing of super secret facilities, project titles, hidden in safes. That's how the whole program got started. It ended up being a 20-year $20 million program.
Ingo is really the father of remote viewing in the modern era. Before Ingo, people were describing the picture in the envelope.
Square.
Good guess, but wrong.
He said, if I want to see what's in the envelope, I'll open the envelope. I can focus my attention anywhere on the planet. Give me something interesting to look at.
And he threatened to quit. And so we asked him, well, you know, what?
I just want to mention there, they showed for just like 1 second there him painting. Ingo Swann also, like it or not, used to paint a lot of cosmic eggs. Several of his paintings, when you go look up Ingo Swann's artwork, he would draw these psychic landscapes in these alternate dimensions, and inside them he would draw these eggs, and inside the egg would be like cracked open, and it would be like a doorway to this other universe. So he used to paint this all the time. So I find that fascinating now that the UFO crash recovery program is like coming out and they're showing footage of them actually capturing 20-foot eggs, egg-shaped UFOs. So I think that's just an interesting point when you go look at Ingo's artwork and where all of this started.
What do you mean? What would you like to do? And he says, just send somebody out in the San Francisco Bay Area and I'll describe where they are.
Well, it takes a lot of guts to accept a challenge like this. The psychics involved could sort of get into it at a creative level and discover things very distant from themselves and then go find out if they were really there.
Well, we had, by now, 30 analysts, not scientists, in CIA, and maybe 6 or 7 scientists.
And now we have to introduce the next character, because again, these are all overlapping people. These dots don't connect at miles. They're a part of the same tapestry. These guys are all friends. They're literally all friends. And I will just say this, when I mentioned earlier that Dr. Hal Puthoff, he used the origins at Stanford Research Institute. We saw him there with Uri Geller, and they were doing that magnetometer testing with him on the graph and all that. And part of what they talk about is how effects with this phenomena can actually affect your brain or cause what they call interference syndrome. And even because for the last 5 years, I've been going to Skinwalker Ranch. I've been over hanging around Area 51 in Nevada at these sites where Robert Bigelow and his team used to actually look to try and find buried UFOs underground and do all of these experiments. And Dr. Jim Segala was actually arranging for me to go get an MRI done with this guy, with Dr. Kit Green. He's currently in Reno, Nevada. I don't know if he works for the CIA. He's the former director of life sciences over the CIA, which means for the CIA, he was the chief medical officer. He was like their head doctor. And basically this is him now involved and talking about Ingo Swann and this remote viewing experiment and what happened. So this connection is deep. Kit Green, Christopher Green, is also the individual that did the brain scan and the MRI on my good friend Chris Bartell, who was a security officer under Robert Bigelow for 8 years at Skinwalker Ranch. So he is the main physician that was doing all the brain scans along with Dr. Gary Nolan, who are now all putting that evidence forward. It came out in part of the chapters of the book at Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, but you hear Gary Nolan talking about this evidence all the time. And it even comes up in the congressional hearings with the UFO whistleblowers. So when David Grush and all these guys came out and they talk about how the UFO crash recovery program is real, interference syndrome came up, and they even referenced the data and the evidence that came from Dr. Kit Green as part of that valid proof. So all of this is science that's going directly back to the head of the CIA, the Pentagon, and all of that. Whether these guys seem like they really are the Men in Black and the secret UFO crash recovery program guys or not, this is who they are. You're seeing their names and their faces right now.
In CIA, and maybe 6 or 7 scientists in CIA talking about these initial dozen or so results of these anecdotal situations.
We began by speaking of some kind of almost a psychic arms race here. Is there any real application to this?
There was a hiatus, and then Sugar Grove came along. And somebody says this cockamamie thing. Well, now what we're doing is we're doing remote viewing by coordinates. And I say, what?
It was codenamed Scanate.
The Scanate program was started by Ingo Swann. And in that program, where we were using coordinate remote viewing, a viewer described what was located at any geographical coordinate of latitude and longitude, and would then describe what's there.
And they tell me what this is. And I say something like, well, you're going to have to prove that to me. And the door opened at the end of the hallway, and a guy walks out. Could you give me some coordinates, just map coordinates of a place that you know? He says, this will do it. He says, I'm positive you don't know anything about what's there. I said, perfect. I took him.
And then Kit gave Hal those coordinates that nobody knew about.
From Ingo's standpoint, he said this is really a sexy target. It's got all kinds of antennas. Seems like a very hush-hush place, very military, and he drew how things were laid out.
The results came back so specific on paper that I was just like, I was kind of nonplussed. It included a diagram, guardhouse, accordion doors that roll up big enough to put a Jeep through, 4 stories below, hallway, cipher lock. And I took it to my colleague Dave, who would give me the coordinates, and I said, here. He said, man, Green, this is nonsense. I said, are you really sure? And he said, man, I gave you the coordinates of the log cabin I just built in West Virginia. So I called up my colleagues and I gave them the results, and I'm sick of it. And just before I hung up, the fellow I was talking to, who I can't name, but whose initials were Russ Targ, said, that's really too bad. It's really too bad. Really too bad. The other guy found the same thing.
Early in the SRI program, there had been some publicity, and Pat Price had read about it. That happened to be right when we had been asked to target on the West Virginia side. So it was over the telephone, saying, I used to be maybe police commissioner or something like that in Burbank, and sometimes I would get intuitive flashes about some crime scene that we were working on, and would turn out.
Hold up. Okay, we got to pause right here. Who can guess in the chat who's in this picture? Because this is unknown, right? Like, people miss this. This comes from a movie called Third Eye Spies. Okay, this is Pat Price here in the front. So he's sitting here like he's doing a remote viewing or looking at a computer system or something at the display. This is Russell Targ. Does everybody know who this guy is back here smoking the cigarette? Do you guys know who this is? Because when you go back to the original CIA files and you look at all this stuff, you dig into the origins and the history of the remote viewing program, there's redacted names. And one of those figures that they talk about was this Mr. X. And that's literally what they call him in a lot of the files. This Mr. X came over and merged, and suddenly the Stanford Research Institute remote viewing program exploded to this whole other level, and it became this entire psychic spy program. Project Stargate, Project Grill Flame, all of the secret projects suddenly exploded. And this is Mr. X. Guess who Mr. X is? This is the photo right here. There's Pat Price, there's Russell Targ. They're in Stanford sitting on the same couch. That's Bob Monroe from the Monroe Institute, from the Gateway Institute, from the Gateway Experience. He is the inventor of hemisync or binaural tones. He's the one that created the Monroe Institute and came up with all of the levels of the gateway process in order to go from 1 up into level 20. And if you ever have done these meditation tapes, it is a protocol for doing meditation to go out of body, to astral project. And when you get up into like level 23, they're literally called like making contact. Those levels are the protocol and the meditation methods that Bob Monroe developed in order to actually go through the meditation steps to communicate with aliens. And there he is in that photo right there at Stanford. And I think people have watched that movie and they totally miss that because it's kind of confidential. Like he's redacted out of all the Stanford Research Institute historical files. And even today they act like SRI and Hal Puthoff and all that and the Monroe Institute were two completely different things. But he was right there sitting on the couch and right there, part of it at the early days, at the very beginning of this. So when Jacques Vallée talks about how he was given that target to remote view Mount Everest and didn't know where he was going, and then all of a sudden he's there,
SRI
that's why.
Comes up with Pat Price. He had a map on the over his desk, and he had a bunch of pins on the map of the world, and their pins were all stuck in the ocean. And I asked him, I said, Pat, what are all those pins? They're just scattered all around. He said, oh, I'm following all the nuclear submarines in the world, and I move the pins around and I relocate them. For an intelligence officer, I mean, this would be one of the most fundamental breakthroughs in naval intelligence if you could follow all the submarines in the world.
Pat Price was brought in independently to describe the same target location and went on to read documents hidden in the vault 3 floors below the surface.
So that's really interesting. Okay, yeah, okay. Talk. What did you say? And I drove to the coordinates. I found the cabin. 100 meters down the road, I found a dirt road from the cabin. I drove down it. Found a guardhouse. Found a dish. Found the accordion door.
This naval installation's purpose is to perform communications research and development for the U.S. Navy, the Department of Defense, and various elements of the U.S. government.
I reported that.
It got to the Office of Research and Development, it got to the Office of OTS, and there was, a huge controversy.
And it started as very small ball.
But what the person who picked the target didn't realize was just right over the ridge, a mile or so away, whatever it was this super secret facility for picking up Russian satellite information as it went overhead. And so both of them said, maybe that's what they want us to describe.
In the 1960s, Sugar Grove became one of the NSA's most important Cold War listening facilities.
And then the whole thing blew up.
But remember, it was about what was inside that building. File folders with the following names. I remember that they were all associated with a pool game, like playing pool or billiards.
Filing cabinet on the north wall labeled Operation Pool Cue. 4-ball, 8-ball, rack up.
I'm saying, this is reminiscent of his visit to the place that Kit took him.
Within 48 hours, I had security officers in my office at headquarters. And they were grim-faced and they were upset. And I was told this officially, it's been made public. The filing cabinets were there, they were green, there were file folders, and they had the exact 3 names on the file folders. Now, that was the first thing that was important, is that they were correct. However, those guys out in California got the code names They got code names that were part of a special access program, not just code names. They got special access program code names, which were classified top secret. The names were classified top secret.
We were then descended upon by all the law enforcement of the United States.
We had government agencies from NSA and CIA coming to visit us and find out why the CIA had targeted a group of psychics to go spying on the NSA.
So I didn't know whether to be sick to my stomach or what to do.
So it wasn't just Kit Green, it was the owners of this site. And, you know, some of it, like some of the names that I told you, turned out to be accurate. And so, you know, the first concern, a security leak, somebody has let this information out.
If I was director of intelligence or even the president, and I was briefed on what you just told me about those code words, I would think that this was either a propaganda thing, or I would think that there's a guy who could probably look inside a nuclear missile silo and give me the launch codes. And that guy is really important and potentially dangerous. It's either a hoax or it's real.
I know. Now, if you're asking me where I sit, it's in the latter.
So there you have it. There's Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann, and they're together. And we know that they worked at Stanford Research Institute together and that they started the psychic spy program. And it was these experiences with Ingo Swann as the premier remote viewer that changed all of this and moved it forward. Look at the painting behind him. Now, this is the same office, the same painting, and there is Hal Puthoff with Lou Elizondo. Should we back that up just a little bit? Not only Lou Elizondo,
At a nuclear
but
missile
Eric
silo.
Davis. These are the who's who of the UFO crash recovery program and the insider track going on right now. Dr. Hal Puthoff, Dr. Eric Davis. This is Eric W. Davis. He is the center of that conspiracy around the Wilson Davis memo. That's him. This is Eric Davis. And there's Lou Elizondo. And they're all standing in front of that same painting where Ingo Swann was. So you tell me if these guys think that remote viewing and psionic assets are real. You tell me if these if these guys think that it's a real thing or not. What's funny, before we keep going, like 4 years ago on a podcast, Lou Elizondo was on there as the guest, and I actually paid $20 for a super chat on this live stream to ask Lou Elizondo if he knew remote viewing. And he actually dodged the question, and he said, I'm aware of it, but I'm not ready to talk about that aspect of the phenomena yet. And that's how he like answered my question like 3 or 4 years ago in a live stream. But the truth is he knew all along, and he's come out since then and admitted that he's done remote viewing and that he's trained in it and did it in the military. And this, so we see this disclosure like slowly coming out, how consciousness is connected to what's going on here. But these guys are all in on the same understanding about how the phenomena works and how contact with UFOs and non-human intelligence works. Before we go any farther, this next part is the very first recorded instance that we have where someone from inside the remote viewing program themselves actually tells a story where they were taken to a location with special forces units and used as a psychic asset or a psionic team member to try and remote view a UFO. And that story exists right here in this book called Penetration, and it was written by Ingo Swann. Ingo Swann tells a story in this book about how he is actually taken by a pair of twins that are special forces operators. And in the book, he describes them like he can't even tell if they're clones or not. They look so similar. Like he's like, did they come out of like a lab or something? Like, this is weird. But occasionally these twins would show up and take him to do these specific missions. And sometimes one of the stories in this book is about how they take him to Los Angeles. And while he's there, they basically use him to spy on this woman walking around who is actually a very dangerous extraterrestrial entity that's hiding, pretending to be a human in Los Angeles, walking around in the grocery store. There's literally a story where they take him and he has to go into the grocery store and stand in line with this woman and remote view her in the book. But check this out. He tells a story in this book that's super mind-blowing, and I think it's literally
We were
the
aloft in
first
about 3
instance of this
minutes.
happening.
It turned out that the other twin was doing the flying. Once aloft, the twin provided some sandwiches, and Axel said, "We are going to the middle of nowhere. It will be rather cold and rough there, but we have all you will need, including a supply of your cigars." He smiled. "So after you've eaten, you should catch some sleep. It's about a 5-hour or so flight. It will be dark when we arrive, and then we will have to drive about 2 hours after that. Don't ask where we are going, since I can't tell you that. And, with some hesitation, it's better that you know not." "You know, Axel," I replied, "it may be that I could function better if I knew what was going on." Axel frowned through the sandwich he was eating. "Well, I can't tell you very much, since doing so would endanger our mission and perhaps you too. But I could ask you what you think is going on." So here it was again, the one-way conversation typical of all Mr. Axelrod encounters. "Well, I guess you guys, whoever you are, have a problem. And from all I can tell, Earth is under some kind of siege. UFOs appear everywhere, are seen by thousands. Yet they are elusive, but of concern. And so you are trying to fit the pieces together. And I would suppose, too, that you are desperate enough at least to try to employ psychics to help you out." "You see," Axel laughed, "I don't have to tell you anything, do I?" It was no use, so I settled down and tried to sleep, which I actually did even though I thought I would not. Axel woke me later. "Fasten your seatbelt. We're going to land in a few moments." I glanced out the windows. It was dark outside and there were no lights anywhere. But shortly we bumped along a runway without the aid of any lights. "No lights?" I commented. "It's a very high-tech plane," Axel commented. "It just looks like a standard Lear." Once landed, we descended from the jet into not just cool, but icy air rich with the smell of pines. Our only lights were flashlights the twins were carrying. Nearby was a van of some kind, painted with camouflage colors. Nearby I could make out a small building, but it was empty, or at least had no lights in it. Inside the van, "Here is a jumpsuit," Axel said. "It is thermalized, yet light. You have to remove everything and you can have no metals on you. I know you have teeth fillings, but there is nothing we can do about that. All the fasteners on the jumpsuit and its hood and attached gloves are made of wool and leather." So shortly, I was geared up, finding there were pockets large enough to hold the cigar supply. While I was changing, the twins had started up the van and we were on our way to wherever we were going. The drive lasted about 2 hours. We climbed up some mountains and negotiated some steep hairpin curves. No one talked at all. Against the dark sky, I could see tall pines whose own darkness blotted out the amazingly beautiful spectacle of billions of stars. We were in the far north, I concluded. At a certain point, the sound of the van's motor ceased, yet the van kept moving. I had, and still don't have, no idea of how a van can move without its engine going. Finally, the van parked beneath some pines. We disembarked. "We have to walk about 40 minutes now," Axel whispered. "It's extremely important that we be as quiet as possible. Do exactly as we do. Make no noise, and do not talk. And do not light a cigar." So we walked in what amounted to almost pure blackness, but at a good pace. At certain points, one of the twins would take my arm to help me. For instance, across a small creek or around an unseen rock. They had some kind of goggles over their eyes, which I took to be night vision things. I didn't see at all why they had not provided me with them too. We went up and over some ridges, and then down into some kind of large, flattish area, dense with pines. Then we climbed into a sort of arroyo. Once there, we walked a few feet further, and sat down on a thick cushion of fallen pine needles behind some large rocks. Axel whispered, "We're here. Out there in front of us is a small lake. As dawn comes, you'll be able to see it through the pines. We now wait and hope we are lucky. Say nothing. Do not make any noise." Lucky? What did that mean? Chapter 10. Seeing One. I couldn't see at all, save the narrowest dark blue-green glimmer of dawn in the east. I whispered back to Axelrod, "What am I supposed to do?" "Just observe. We'll debrief later," he responded.
Wasn't there an Axel or an Axelrod in some of the books about Skinwalker Ranch during the Bigelow days? It seems like there was an Axelrod that like a bunch of people in one of the books about Skinwalker Ranch was talking about. I wonder if that's literally the same guy. We're going to pause really quick because this is where the story's about to get really good here with his experience. But he's literally taken by these twins to go up to this place. He has no idea where he's going. He gets on an airplane and flies like a few hours. He thinks he's in Alaska. He's pretty sure he's in Alaska. And I think at the end of the story, he even sees some vehicles that have like Alaskan license plates on them. So that's where he's like, "Oh, I'm in Alaska." But they don't take him to like an observatory to watch outer space, look up at the stars. They literally take him to a mountain to watch something that's supposed to like come out of the water, to come out of a mountain lake. And when you look at the cover of the book over here, the name of the book is called Penetration, and it's about your consciousness penetrating through the veil of the ether. But look at this book cover. It's like literally these beams of light coming out of this mountain. It's spilling over and going into the ground like a spiral. This thing is coming out of the ground, and there's not only flying saucers like with the light coming through them, but they're all connected with these beams. And this whole big one's like the mothership is like a big diamond controlling them all or something up here. Not that a book cover is anything like real, but there's a chance that Ingo Swann might have even painted that book cover. I'm not sure, but I just find it fascinating the way that he did his artwork, considering who he was in the program and the beginnings of it.
But it's really important now to observe complete silence from this point on, and do not move unless I tell you to. They detect heat, noise, motion like mad. So I was silent. There we were, 4 of us, sitting silently like rocks ourselves. But suddenly the 2 twins gave some kind of hand signal. "It's begun," Axel whispered. "Please, please do not make any noise, and do not move unless we tell you to." My eyeballs rolled around, trying to perceive what had begun. I couldn't see anything unusual at all, save for what appeared to be some gray fog forming up in the direction of the lake. I thought it was just morning fog coming up. This fog continued forming for about 5 minutes, and suddenly I saw what had begun. For in a moment's eye flicker, the gray fog changed, first into luminous neon blue, and then into angry purple. At that point, Axel and one of the twins put a firm hand on each of my shoulders, and it was a good thing they did. A network of purple, red, and yellow lightning bolts shot in all crazy directions through the cloud, and I would have jumped up if not held down. And then there it was, somewhat transparent at first, but in the next second, as if fading up, like the movie term, out of nowhere, there it was, solidly visible over the lake whose reflecting waters I could now clearly see. And it was getting bigger. I don't really know what I had expected, but I had assumed that what I would see, if anything, would be something like a flying saucer. No chance of a saucer here, baby, because it was triangular, and its top angles sort of inverted in pulses, so that overall it appeared to be diamond-shaped. At that moment, in my astonishment, we could hear a wind coming, and it moved past us like a tangible magnetic field, rustling the pine trees around us so much that some cones and branches fell on us. The two firm hands on my shoulders tightened, warning me not to move in pure physical reaction. At the same time, ruby red laser-like beams began shooting out of the thing, which incredibly was now growing even more in size. While still stationary in its original position over the lake, one of the twins now talked softly, although the sound of his voice was like thunder to me. "Shit, they're enveloping the area. They're going to spot us." I had no time to wonder about what he meant. Indeed, some of the laser-red beams had begun blasting pine trees. Of all things. At the same time, the thing had now increased its size to what may have been about 90 feet wide. The whole of this so far had been accomplished in complete silence, and even the electric bolts had not crackled. The blasting of the trees, though, was now audible, while at the same time I could begin to hear low-frequency pulsations. "They're blasting deer or porcupines or something in the forest," Axel explained softly in a calm but tense stage whisper. "The beams sense biological body heat, and they're sure to hone in on us." At that moment, the two hands tightened on my shoulders, and I was dragged and practically thrown back down into the arroyo. There was a terrific pop where we had been, and some large branches of nearby pines cascaded down on us. That was my last sight of the triangular thing. But in that last moment, I could see the water of the lake surging upward like a waterfall, going upward, as if being sucked into the machine. I had landed rather hard on my butt, but with my feet dragging, the twins pulled me up and ran with me between them down the arroyo a short way, where they suddenly flung me like a sack of corn under a rock overhang of some kind. Axel plopped in virtually on top of me, and the four of us huddled packed together like mice in a matchbox. Axel was breathing hard. The twins were breathing hard. I was barely breathing at all, and it took some while to realize that a rock or stick had cut through the jumpsuit into my leg, and that the wound was bleeding. However, I needed no whispered instructions to be as quiet and still as possible. I was virtually petrified with a kind of terror for which there are few, if any, words to describe. But there was also a kind of thrill. I had seen one. There we remained for a period which could have lasted anywhere between 5 minutes to 5 hours, for all I knew. In this timeless zone, I heard one of the twins say, "All clear now," which seemed absolutely the most ludicrous thing I had ever heard. If anything was clear, I had not the faintest idea what it was. Axel asked if I was hurt. The twins stood up and, of all things, calmly took leaks while surveying the environment. For the first time, I noticed that the sky was sunlit, the pines gloriously dark green, and that the birds had been sounding off for quite some time. I stood shakily up and threw up the contents of my stomach no less than 3 times. Axel fussed with inspecting my leg wound, not very large, but bloody enough. And I started to say something like, yeah. I snorted. "Don't tell anyone, huh?" "No," Axel responded. "I wasn't going to say that, but that it's gone now, and everything's okay." I stared at him incredulously, and just as irrationally said, "Then it's okay to light up a cigar, huh?" Which I proceeded to do by pulling out a pack from the jumpsuit leg pocket. The cigars were smashed, but while sitting on a rock, I licked one of them back together, and I proceeded to smoke. One of the twins was limping. The other was nonchalantly cleaning his fingernails with a small stick. As for me, cascades of the most forbidding anger were pulsating through my entire body, making my hands shake. My reality hopper was an ultimate wreckage, la-la land to the max. Finally, Axel said that the water in the stream was good to drink, and one of the twins jerked his head as if meaning we should depart, which we did, as if just coming back from a hiking expedition. "So," Axelrod asked while walking, "what did you sense?" I burst out laughing. "You're completely nuts, Axel. I have to be calm, cool, collected, and in good shape to sense anything, but you can bet your ass you've got a real problem, haven't you?" Then, from a queasy area of sense-making, not exactly intellectually conscious, it was a drone of some kind, unmanned, controlled from somewhere else, wasn't it? Axel frowned, looking at the slope of the hill we were descending. What was it doing here? He asked tentatively. Well, for Christ's sake, it was thirsty, taking on water, obviously. Someone, somewhere, needs water. So I suppose they just come and get it. You don't need to be a psychic to see that. Yeah, that's it. Supply ship, Earth. Let's drive over to Earth, go shopping, and pick up what we need. That kind of thing. More silent walking until we were again driving down the bumpy road in the van.
Isn't that amazing? So he tells that whole story. That was Ingo Swann, again, who started at the Stanford Research Institute there with Hal Puthoff. He was right there with Uri Geller, Jacques Vallée, Edgar Mitchell, Bob Monroe, and all of these guys. And they learned. Hal Puthoff was mentored and taught by who we started this entire video tonight with, Andrei Puharich, who made contact with his radio frequencies with Enki, or the Council of the Nine, or whatever. And so here we have all of that culminating up to a field expedition where they went to Stanford. They got a special forces team together. They got a psychic spy with Ingo Swann, and they actually took him to a spot where allegedly a UFO would appear and disappear on a regular basis and do this. And so on schedule, they decided for the first time ever to take Ingo Swann, their leading remote viewer, and to go on site and actually do this. This is the very first instance historically that we know of an actual psionic asset. A psychic spy, a psionic asset being used with a special forces unit team and taken to a target location. And their job was to try and remote view and make telepathic contact with the object. And he describes that whole experience. And there's some key things that happened because, first of all, the twins are really strange, right? But also they checked his entire body and clothing and everything that he had to make sure he wasn't wearing anything metal. They said they couldn't do anything about the fillings in his teeth, but all of his clothing, even the buttons and all that stuff, had to be made of like fabric or plastic. So nothing metal. And then when this object appeared, it materialized basically out of a fog above the lake. And then it shot out these lasers and zapped anything living and running around the lake like a defense measure, like a security system, like a bug zapper. And then it sucked up the water and then vanished. And then they turned to Ingo Swann and they're like, well, what was it? And they expected him to have remote viewed and done telepathy with that object to tell them what it was. And I think that is the first recorded instance in writing of a psionic asset. And it was Ingo Swann who came out of the remote viewing program at Stanford. So I think that whole connection and how that goes right to Hal Puthoff and back to all these same people, this tapestry, the threads are actually really close together when you analyze it. Now, Hal Puthoff was there with Ingo Swann, and we saw him also in these pictures with Eric Davis and Lou Elizondo. And so how does this all matter and how does this make sense? The metamaterial.
For years, the Pentagon secretly studied the seemingly impossible abilities of unknown craft captured in these military videos. Scientists now want to know if the materials used in these mystery aircraft allow them to do what they do. For years, one of the secret studies was carried out by Bass, a Las Vegas operation hidden within Bigelow Aerospace. Documents first reported by the I-Team show that Bass landed a contract with the DIA, and one of the objectives was to study so-called metamaterials, as well as futuristic technologies.
There was a multi-layered bismuth and magnesium sample. Bismuth layers less than a human hair. Magnesium samples about 10 times the size of a human hair. Supposedly picked up in the crash retrieval of an advanced aerospace vehicle. Looks like it's been in the crash.
In Las Vegas back in June, physicist Hal Puthoff came pretty close to saying that this weird wedge of metamaterial came from a crashed saucer, but he can't know for sure. Putoff and his colleague, Dr. Eric Davis, are on the cutting edge of attempts to identify an assortment of bits and pieces that are seemingly beyond anything we can create. This one sample is engineered in layers thinner than microns through a process unknown on Earth and for a purpose we can only guess.
Nowhere could we find any evidence that anybody ever made one of these. When we talked to people who in the materials field who should know, they said, we don't know why anybody would want to make anything like this.
Astrophysicist Dr. Jacques Vallée has been analyzing mystery metals since the 80s.
And we just realized and learned from the Somewhere in the Skies podcast that Jacques Vallée was also there at the very beginning of artificial intelligence creation and also at the very beginning of the remote viewing program at Stanford. And here he is still with Hal Puthoff doing this presentation about the metamaterials. These are all the same guys that all worked together and knew what was going on. And these guys all worked as a team under Bigelow Aerospace and that contract.
Often using the technical expertise of Stanford University and Silicon Valley to unravel unknown samples acquired from all over the world. Vallée pointedly steers clear of any military funding, and he shared his findings at public conferences.
We have multiple samples now from multiple sources, ranging a wide variety of integrity.
These days, former intelligence officer Lou Elizondo helps to collect and protect unknown chunks for the To the Stars Academy. Before that, he ran ATIP, the Pentagon's secret UFO study, the same one which released the now famous videos. This summer, To the Stars launched ATOM, its own effort to find and study pieces of material that may have been stashed away for decades after being retrieved from the sites of close encounters. Elizondo says there are legitimate reasons why the military and now private groups are in a race to figure out these materials.
What our internal efforts are to potentially, I'm not saying we're doing this, maybe replicate that technology or to reverse engineer that technology, right? Now you're getting into some sensitivities that you don't necessarily want everybody to be privy to.
George Knapp, 8 News Now.
In Chris Bledsoe's book, he also mentions at one point a UFO appearing as an orb in his backyard or near his property, and how this like slag or this molten liquid metal fell off the bottom and landed on the ground. And Chris Bledsoe's family went and collected it. And he describes how Lou Elizondo came and visited his family and basically took it. So Lou Elizondo also has alleged metamaterial from Chris Bledsoe's backyard as well. They have done this studying. If you go to the Stars Academy website right now, you can go on that website. There are tabs and links to go into this metamaterial that they're studying. And there is full high definition photographs of this piece of material and tons of spectral analysis scientific data about it. And they've just, like in the last year or so, released a ton of research data on some of this metamaterial. And of all the people, Tom DeLonge from Blink-182 over there being behind all of it. So there you have it. And the connection is directly back also again to Skinwalker Ranch. Look at who we have here. This is Hal Puthoff. And there's one of my close friends even today. I just messaged him on Signal this morning. And Dr. Segala is asking me now to help him actually manage the modular unidentified phenomena alert system, YouTube and Instagram, and a whole social media push, because we have 10,000 of these sensor units that all started by Hal Puthoff back at Stanford doing experiments with Uri Geller and with Ingo Swann back in the laboratory. Now, these guys still work together. Hal Puthoff and Jim Segala are really close friends and good colleagues. Jim Segala went and worked with Dr. Hal Puthoff at Skinwalker Ranch. So they were there right at the end when it changed hands from Bigelow and it came over into ownership with Brandon Fugel. Hal Puthoff was the lead scientist for Bigelow, him and Eric Davis, and then they did the transfer. And I'm going to tell you right now, this has never been said, I don't think, anywhere else. Everybody asks, where did all the Bigelow files go? Where did all the lost Skinwalker files go? all of the research that was done by Robert Bigelow at Skinwalker Ranch and all that time that Chris Bartell was there, all of the stories that you've heard, everybody goes on X and they ask Brandon Fugel, where's that data? Why won't you release the data? I'll tell you why. I know exactly why. Robert Bigelow hired the company Earth Tech Space and Sciences, which is Hal Puthoff's company and Eric Davis's company, to conduct that private research and conduct that scientific study as a contracted entity. So when Skinwalker Ranch ended, and when Bob Bigelow handed the keys over to Brandon Fugel, guess where all that scientific research and the papers went? They didn't stay with Bigelow Aerospace and they didn't go to Brandon Fugel. They went to Earth Tech with Hal Puthoff. And Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis are literally sitting on all of those years of scientific data from Skinwalker Ranch and haven't released it. But that scientific data from those experiments and the data they collected from Skinwalker Ranch, my friend Jim Segala, Hal Puthoff, Brandon Fugel, and Eric Bard all took as an entire briefing and took to the Senate Select Committee, to Congress, and to the Pentagon as actual evidence of UFOs and paranormal interaction. And there's Hal Puthoff, the same individual that was clear back at the beginning with Uri Geller at Stanford, with Edgar Mitchell at Stanford, and going all the way up through. He was there with Ingo Swann when Ingo Swann was taken by special forces. And Uri Geller even called him a CIA agent when they went to NASA to look at the metamaterials. And it's Hal Puthoff was the first guy next to Travis Taylor to study that piece of metamaterial when it showed up in Nevada. So when the metamaterial came out of Roswell, and Edgar Mitchell went and got the smuggled pieces of metamaterial, they gave it to Art Bell. Art Bell gave it to Linda Moulton Howe. Linda Moulton Howe gave it to Travis Taylor, who is the lead scientist now at Skinwalker Ranch. You guys see how these puzzle pieces all fit together? And Travis Taylor studied the metamaterial and then gave it to Hal Puthoff. Hal Puthoff still has it, and now it's at To the Stars Academy with Tom DeLonge. He has all of the Bigelow files. He has all of the metamaterial from that research. Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis is where that information is sitting right now with those guys. And Dr. Jim Segala, after they're still friends and still colleagues, and Dr. Jim Segala still has top secret clearances. And now, as he was the lead engineer and physicist building the sensor systems for Dr. Hal Puthoff, he was the one building the test equipment, the actual devices to capture the proof of what was going on at Skinwalker Ranch. Dr. Jim Segala is now our lead physicist and engineer for the Crusher crew right here. As small as we are, as small of a community as we are, there's only like 280 of us watching right now. He literally is working with us, and we have 10,000 of these sensor units available now to prove that this is real, like that this telepathic phenomenon connection with these entities actually affects your environment and can even affect your body and even your brain. Okay, so I hope you guys are seeing how these pieces all fit together, and these people all are together. Even us right here in this chat watching this video are a part of this. If you click the link in the description and you become a part of the study for phase 2 for the Modular Unidentified Phenomena Alert System study, you will literally be a part of phase 2 of this research that went back to Washington. That's how close this circle is. We're in that circle right here, right? Jim Segala is a part of our Patreon team. It's amazing. It's amazing. I go up and hang out. I text these guys, not Hal Puthoff, but I text. I just got done a couple of weeks ago texting Brandon Fugel and Eric Bard about arranging for me and Chris Bledsoe to go up to Skinwalker Ranch together this year. Just think about how all this is connected, right? Okay, let's keep going. But they all went to Washington and took all of this back to the Pentagon. And this is the real UFO whistleblower data and evidence that is the real UFO disclosure that's coming out from Washington. When you see the reports on the news, this is literally where it's coming from, and you can be a part of it. That's how crazy this is. People have a hard time wrapping their head around it. They think it's some all happening in some mystical place in an underground facility, but we're really a part of it. And these people, some of them are actually friends of ours. So it's all right there. Okay, let's keep going. We all started talking about this because recently the UFO whistleblower stuff has come out, and we've got Jacob Barber and his team of special forces units, these Green Beret and Delta Force officers and nuclear commanders coming out. And they said what? They came out on News Nation with Ross Coulthart, and they said that they use psionic assets, and that there has been this secret legacy program to combine psychic spies from within the remote viewing program with Delta Force operators and people in the Air Force and these special forces units. And they use remote viewing, just like we heard Ingo Swann talk about, to not only find these UFOs and where they're hidden, but to actually take psychic control over them and then crash land them and go retrieve them. And if this is real, you guys just witnessed for the last 2 hours the trail of individuals and the evidence and the legacy of who actually built that program and where it started and how. Those are the people, those are the faces. Werner von Braun, Uri Geller, Hal Puthoff, and Edgar Mitchell standing at NASA. And when Uri Geller touches that metamaterial and knows it's not from this planet, that created instantly the psionic program. After Edgar Mitchell went to the moon and back, and they saw UFOs following them to the moon and back, if this is real, just wrap your head around this. They're using psychics to go out and capture these egg-shaped UAPs. And Jacob Barber is saying that these things come out of the ocean, come right out of the ground, and right out of the side of a mountain. Like they phase into our physical reality. And they're doing this through psionics, through mentalism, through remote viewing and telepathy.
We have another team. They're called the psionics team. There seems to be a subset of people that have the unique ability to actually summon these craft, to be able to focus their thoughts and make objects appear in the sky. Jordan, I really appreciate you joining us here today.
Alex, it's an honor to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
So maybe let's start by sharing a little bit about your background.
Yeah. So most recently, I worked in the space technology space, a little bit of data science, ultimately taking different imagery types and trying to solve solutions for the utility industry.
I'm curious, by chance, do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet?
I'm certain of that.
You're certain? How certain are you?
100%.
I mean, Jordan, that's a pretty bold statement. Where does that certainty come from?
That certainty comes from my firsthand experience in what I term a psionic exploitation program between the years of 2005 and 2010, where I interfaced and worked with non-human intelligence and things like UAP directly.
I mean, Jordan, that is an incredible claim. For the viewer at home, what were you doing in this program on a daily basis?
Yeah, so this would look like things that many people would consider woo-woo-y, right? Like astral projection or meditation. But ultimately, what we were really investigating was how far could we stretch the bounds of human consciousness. Beyond that, how could we get human consciousness to interface directly with things like recovered materials and recovered crafts? What I can tell you from the craft and some of the different projects that we worked on directly is ultimately that they interfaced with us. What I mean by that is my consciousness could project into these craft and recovered materials and then access a suite of commands, essentially capabilities to do various things, including piloting. But ultimately, the story is not about piloting some UAP with your mind. This story is much more about what is consciousness?
Yeah.
Why can we interface with these things?
Do you have material that supports these claims?
I have tons of material, linearly, autobiographical records that will support my claims.
And Jake, for the listener at home, based on your firsthand experience, there are craft of non-human origin that you have recovered
that seem to be piloted or interfacing directly with human consciousness. Is that correct?
Yeah, let me tell you a very short story.
Okay.
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 An aircraft crashed.
Yeah.
My team was deployed.
Yeah.
We secured the perimeter.
Yeah.
We secured that target.
Yeah.
We transported that target. We escorted that target and provided security for that target. That target was transported to a facility of a very well-known government-private partner. The decision was made to bring in a team that represented a different private partner who was working on consciousness and the mechanism by which humans could interface with technology. The two were merged, and we were involved with that process.
You were involved in that process?
Yes.
So, Jake, based on your firsthand experience, it sounds
Oh my God, there's that word, firsthand. Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
But it is firsthand.
It is firsthand.
It is firsthand.
Yeah.
Based on your firsthand experience, it sounds like we're living in a science fiction novel, and there seem to be craft of non-human origin that are flying around our skies, and certain human consciousnesses seem to be able to interface with these craft. And there are organizations or institutions, if you will, all around the world that know this fact.
Yeah. Isn't it depressing that should be shocking?
It is
Like,
very depressing, yeah.
That shouldn't be shocking. Thank God, like, you know what? I mean, forgive me, but I'm over that.
Yeah.
So, like, let's get past that, because that is the case, and it is exciting, but we have a duty here. We have a moment in time, thanks to friends like David Grush, who has stuck his neck out and paved a trail with our government, who, for better or worse, has control over a lot of things. This is an opportunity for everyone to make a situation appear where we realize that our consciousness has an impact on our everyday life. I can tell you that this is not unique to the United States, and it's not unique to the most well-known private partners of the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. There is a global effort and interest in this, and a global capability in doing this. Crash recovery is something, and reverse engineering is something that is being done by a number of agencies or organizations worldwide. And I know that because my team has been sought after and offered jobs to go perform our services for employers outside the United States. Yeah.
I'm not really sure what to expect, to be honest. I think when you talk to the teams, they have unwavering conviction that something is going to happen, that we're actually going to see things in the sky. Not only do they think that we're going to see things in the sky, but we're going to be able to track it. We're going to be able to actually gather a variety of different data related to this thing.
My name is Michael Batista. I'm 32 years old. I'm a former U.S. Army Green Beret, 3rd Group.
And Mike, do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has been visiting this planet?
Yes, I do.
When you make that statement, how confident are you that is true?
I'm extremely confident.
Do you feel like you believe that is true, or do you feel like you know that is true?
I know that it's true.
When did your experience with the phenomenon begin?
The first experiences I was having was in my early teens, and it started to accelerate as I grew up. And as my time in the military was ending and I was getting out, it really accelerated at that point.
And when this happens, can you explain how it usually manifests or how you experience it?
It usually manifests as something anomalous in the sky, orbs, crafts, different pyramid-looking objects moving at extreme rates of speed and doing very angular movements.
When you do this, are there other people around? Do they actually see you doing this?
I have multiple witnesses that can testify that that is a fact.
And how many times do you feel like you've been able to summon something in the sky?
Anytime I want.
There you have it, you guys. Hopefully you guys got a good sense now from the very beginning, the initial people in the Psychic Spy program, how it all goes back to those early days. Andrea Puharich trying to develop hearing aid devices and listening devices. Edgar Mitchell going to the moon and doing remote viewing experiments with Hal Puthoff. And then them all coming back and doing more further remote viewing experiences with people like Ingo Swann, where they actually moved and affected scientific devices at a distance. Remote viewing and psychic out-of-body travel experiments with Jacques Vallée. All of these names and people are so familiar to all of you in ufology and the history of it. They've been right in your face almost this whole time. And now we see how the dots connect all the way up through even Bigelow Aerospace, all the way back even to Skinwalker Ranch, all the way back to now these current whistleblower reports and everything coming out with Jacob Barber, the egg UFO again, and all of that, and how all of these pieces connect. And when we go back and think about where all of this came from, Andrei Puharich, the Montauk Project, and this understanding of electromagnetic waves and how they affect human consciousness, you start to see that we live in a reality that's not quite what it seems. We live in this layer of frequencies and waveforms, or this ether that we are a part of and we evolved in or came into. And we are capable of penetrating through that veil, as Ingo Swann said, through consciousness, through visiting these ancient sites, through harmonizing. The more you go to these ancient sites and meditate, the more you get in synchronization with it. You start to see coincidences. Synchronization happens. These little things occur in your life, and suddenly you feel like maybe your house is haunted, and these supernatural visions start to occur. All these experiences that you hear talked about in even religious texts and these mystical books that you hear about all the time started kind of in the same way. So when you put the bigger picture all together, from this ancient mystic wisdom of the people that were building pyramids on these locations to try and tap in and communicate with the gods, or to other shaman across space-time, and now how these modern day programs have gone back through all of that knowledge, and they've tried to understand it. Was it psychedelics? Is it frequencies? Is it the earth itself? Does it matter if you go to the moon or back or whatever? And at the end of the day, they discovered that human consciousness and telepathy is something that is not just inside the body, but is connected to the whole, to the all, to the waveform of the whole universe. And if we learn those inner secrets about ourselves, and we learn how to go through those gateways, we can step through those doors and make contact with these other dimensions. A lot of people are scared. A lot of institutions, religious organizations, and likewise will tell you not to do that. And they gatekeep it all. They control it all. And I think that's why the Gateway program is the Gateway program. Instead of it being gate kept and having all of that being locked down and kept secret inside government programs, the truth is starting to come out about the origins of all this and how it works. And this goes clear back to those early days at Stanford with Hal Puthoff and Uri Geller. And I just think it's all fascinating. That's the whole presentation basically for tonight. I hope all of you enjoyed that. It was a super deep dive into this, but for those of you that are into it, it should put a lot of those puzzle pieces together for you. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. We've been going on for 2.5 hours now, but I think it needed to be done. And we will see you guys in the next one.